There may have been no sound there, but waking up at 5:30 a.m. to the shouts of men in blue tracksuits was probably worse than hearing any sound at all. More importantly, they had no choice. This was not a death. In the 1980s, South Korea was experiencing a massive economic leap. After the war in the 1950s that divided the Korean peninsula into North and South, the government had managed to heal its wounds and achieve extraordinary growth, and it had no intention of losing it. The entire country was filled with excitement ahead of the 1986 Asian Games and the 1988 Seoul Olympics. The government rapidly promoted efforts to rebrand the country, aiming to attract tourists and showcase its remarkable prosperity. However, behind the miracle on the Han River, behind South Korea's rapid growth, lay unimaginable pain and dark truths. In April 1981, a letter arrived at the office of Prime Minister Nam Deok-woo, written by hand by former General and then President Chun Doo-hwan, who had seized power through a military coup a year earlier. The letter ordered authorities to prevent begging and take strict protective measures against so-called vagrants. In preparation for the 1986 and 1988 international events, the government developed a policy to cleanse South Korea's streets. From that point on, nothing would ever be the same. Under regulations allowing the arbitrary detention of vagrants, so-called social welfare centers were established, and buses labeled Vagrant Transport Vehicle began appearing in major cities like Busan. The government was collecting people from the streets as if rounding up rabid dogs. Most of these centers were privately operated and received government subsidies based on the number of people they housed. For every individual kept inside, the state paid the institution, effectively a commission. This created a powerful incentive for center owners to gather as many people as possible. But the beneficiaries of this commission system were not limited to the institution owners. State police officers also received payments for sending people to these centers under the pretense of cleaning the streets, and these bonuses were added directly to their salaries. The homeless, the disabled, especially orphan children, and even ordinary citizens who were randomly stopped on the street and could not produce identification were forcibly taken as part of this project. Dozens of such detention centers, both state-run and commission-based private institutions, were rapidly established. Refusal was forbidden. Even if you resisted, you were dragged away by force. This was the kind of oppression that began in South Korea during the 1980s. And among these many centers, one would later give rise to rumors of being the real story behind Squid Game, passing its horrors down through generations, Brothers Home. Han Jun-seon was just one of the people taken there, along with his older sister. It was a beautiful autumn day in 1984. Han, who was 8 or 9 years old at the time, was enjoying a long-awaited city trip with his father and sister. However, his father still had a few tasks to take care of, and not wanting the children to be a burden, he decided to leave them in what he believed was the safest place possible, the front of a police station. The errand would take only a few minutes. The children would wait in the safest place in the city, under the supervision of those expected to be the most trustworthy people, police officers. But contrary to expectations, those officers would be the ones to tear the family apart. While the children waited, a bus stopped in front of the police station. The officers forcibly placed the children onto the bus. The police officer had already reached an agreement with the man who took custody of them, exchanging a few discreet gestures. The children had no idea where they were being taken. They cried, telling the man on the bus that their father had told them to wait there. It didn't matter, they were loud. The men in charge were angry and cruel. The bus took them to a private facility known as Brothers Home. Han and his sister would only leave this place after enduring 3.5 years of nightmare. People were rounded up for absurd reasons. Why did you look at me? Why did you walk sideways? Why are your eyes that color? Why are your clothes torn? Both the police who collected people from the streets and the institutions that received them profited from this system. In that sense, the masked figures in the series were not fiction. They were the system itself. Families went to the police to search for their missing children. But you already know this story. Filing reports and asking questions meant nothing. Brothers Home was the largest of these centers, located near a residential area outside the port city of Busan. Its owner, Park In-kun, insisted that the facility was established to feed, clothe, and educate vagrants, to cleanse society. On paper, every person was supposed to be held for only 1 year, educated, and then released back into society. In reality, many would never see their families again. In 1987, after more than 30 escapees exposed what was truly happening behind the walls, the centers were shut down. Only then did the truth begin to surface. Every morning began at 5:30 a.m., with church bells and the shouts of guards. Hymns had to be memorized and recited flawlessly. If you scratched yourself or let your eyes wander during prayer, you learned the consequences through physical pain, not metaphorically, but very real pain. Each so-called guest, each prisoner, was assigned daily production quotas. Carry this many stones, build this many meters of wall. If you were sick or injured and failed to meet the quota, your punishment was a baseball bat. People were starved, tortured with cold water, and subjected to unspeakable acts. Escape attempts were often reported by fellow prisoners hoping to earn favor or avoid collective punishment. If someone escaped, the leader of the dormitory, or sometimes everyone, would be beaten. Blue tracksuits, plastic shoes, identification numbers, and nylon underwear were all that defined them as human beings. 4 people shared a single bunk bed. Meals usually consisted of spoiled fish and barley rice. At night, you had to watch your back. Your greatest concern was not just your life, but also your dignity. Evidence collected later showed that throughout the 1980s, people were used like slaves at construction sites, farms, and factories. One detainee, known as Sonia, managed to escape in 1986 at the age of 17. Just months later, she gave birth. The reason for both the pregnancy and her escape was clear. Officials at Brothers' home were forging documents and selling children abroad for adoption. She fled to prevent her child from being sold. All of those children had parents searching for them. The numbers were horrifying. In just 1985 and 1986, the South Korean government provided $10 million in funding to Brothers' home alone for the people it collected over those 2 years. You can imagine how many individuals that represented. Investigations in 1987 revealed that only 10% of the detainees were actually vagrants or criminals. Everyone else, those without permanent addresses, beggars, the disabled, orphans, was forced to live in these facilities. Prisoners were made to work in at least 20 factories across sectors such as wood and metal processing, clothing, footwear, and fishing. Many were also forced to construct new buildings in Busan and Ulsan. Products manufactured in these factories were exported to Japan and Europe, creating yet another revenue stream for Brothers' home's owner. Children were forced to work as well, producing fishing lines and hooks for export to Japan. Any defect in the products resulted in beatings with clubs and bats. According to official records, though they are considered unreliable, there were 3,128 detainees in Brothers' home in 1986, and nearly 1/5 of them died due to conditions inside the facility. Estimates suggest the true numbers were far higher. Conditions did not improve over time. Only in 1987 did a surprise police raid expose the abuses. The facility was shut down immediately. Park In-kun was arrested, but received only 2.5 years in prison, solely for embezzling state funds. He died of natural causes in 2016, having spent most of his remaining life free. Investigators found $5 million in his office, money from state subsidies and profits earned through forced labor and exports. Yet no one was held fully accountable for the human rights violations committed at Brothers' home. Even today, some individuals involved in this case continue their political careers. The government rejected further investigation requests and actively fought against renewed inquiries. No state institution has ever issued a formal apology. Because the government wanted to avoid negative press ahead of the Olympics, coverage of these events in 1987 was minimal, and efforts to bury the truth have continued ever since. However, one survivor, Han Jun-seon, managed to bring the case back into the public eye through drawings, solo protests in front of government buildings, and tireless activism. Though silenced for years, he eventually made himself visible across the country. The Seoul Central District Court later ruled in favor of Han and 15 other victims, ordering the state to pay $4.6 billion, won in compensation. The court stated while praising itself as a welfare state, the government classified the poor, the sick, and the socially disadvantaged as vagrants, and isolated them from society under the pretext of strict intervention.